Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Common Grounds Podcast. Before we keep going, be sure to hit the subscribe button and click the bell so that you can be notified anytime I upload new episodes or clips. If you'd like to support the podcast, click the link in the description to purchase a Common Grounds mug. Today I'm talking with my pastor, Pastor Shane Klinkerman. We'll be talking about self-awareness, taking criticism, and transparency. With all that being said, let's roll the intro. This podcast was created to have earnest conversations with ministers and ministry leaders in the Christian church. You're listening to Common Grounds. How's the boat treating you?
I love it.
Yeah?
Hadn't been out on it enough.
Really? When's the last time you went out on it?
Spring break, March, that week of spring break.
Did you take it to Arkansas?
No.
Where'd you go?
Lake Livingston.
Because that's where you like to fish, or
It is. It's
just
where
clear?
I like to fish.
Oh, okay.
So
Trout.
yes, they have trout in the bay, but I'm a freshwater guy. You know?
Did you do fly fishing when you're up in Arkansas?
I've done it before.
My father-in-law went fly fishing like the year before we got married.
Yeah.
Not my father. I didn't marry my father-in-law. But the year before I married my wife, and man, we were out there for like 4 hours, and it was a nice summer day, but it was like you could feel the coolness coming off of the water.
Were you in Arkansas?
Yeah. Actually, I might have been in Missouri. We might have just gotten into Missouri, like right near the border between Missouri and Arkansas, and it was just so nice.
It is.
Yeah, we got like a day pass for fishing down the street at a gas station, and it went by super fast. That was where that was like some kind of water snake that was coming right at me while I was fishing. And I was like, I was about to like hightail it out there, and I was like, wait.
Because you were in the water, right?
Yeah.
Were you
yeah,
in the
no,
water?
I was in the water and I saw it.
Yeah.
I saw it around, but it looked like it was fine, and it was leaving it was leaving me alone. And then I was like, And then I looked up, and then I saw it coming, like swimming right at me. And then I was about to turn around and get out of the water, and then I was like, wait, I'm a Texan. So I grabbed my fly rod and went whack. That thing turned around so fast and went the other way. It was hilarious. I've never felt more one with nature. I digress. How long have you been a pastor?
A lead pastor, almost 10 years. And in ministry, about 21 years.
How old are you now?
I'm 43.
Been in there for 21 years. You know, it's funny because people were asking me why I stepped out of the youth ministry. I was like, I've been doing this for over half my life. I just need to move on now.
Sure.
And so yeah, I can't imagine being in pastoral roles for 21 years.
Well, as youth pastor, yeah, and then lead pastor. So yeah, and I think that's it's hard you find yourself going, have I done this too long? Do I need something fresh? Do I, there's a constant question of, is it fresh? Is it, because I sit and I watch guys that have done it much longer than I have. And I'm like, how do you do it? Because there are days that I was like, man, I've done this a long time. Is there anything fresh? Is there anything new? Just in the 10 years that I've been lead pastor, or almost 10 years, I sit and I go, wow, I don't see how guys do it for long periods of time.
Have you ever asked?
I have.
What do they say?
The response is different. I think guys who have done it a long time and enjoy doing it a long time take time to, whether it's a sabbatical or a week of fishing and camping or just getting away. I think it's in those moments that they've said that they've found fresh new purpose, fresh new vision.
Have you found that to be true for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, is it all about finding that aha moment and moving on, or a moment of clarity? Or
for me, he always brings me back to the simplicity of ministry and our walk with him, and to look at those things, to look at how God is growing in people's lives, and not so much in the grand scheme of how we think that it should be going, or those types of things. And it's usually in those moments where I have to sit back and really just evaluate, or I find myself evaluating, God, give me a fresh vision, give me a fresh direction. And that's when he does it, in that moment. And so yeah, for me, it kind of is that moment of revelation where something is fresh and new. So
let's talk about your earlier years in ministry, but kind of staying on the same subject. What in your earlier years of ministry kind of reaffirm that belief of kind of going back to the simplicity of ministry?
Early on, I think it was those moments. In youth ministry, I always wanted to quit every Monday, and I think that's true. Really, in ministry in general, you want to quit because you have a Sunday or a youth service where it's really really high and it seems like everything goes right, and then Monday comes and reality sets in. People are back into their regular way of life, and you just go, I failed. Or a kid has a moment early on in ministry. A student would stumble and fall or just walk away from their relationship with God, and you'd be like, what am I doing? It's like I'm a failure. I can't even get kids to walk constantly in their walk with God. And then in those moments, I would find myself, I'd go home and I'd tell April, I'm done. I'm gonna quit. I'm gonna go back to building mobile homes.
How old were you at the time?
Oh, I was in my early 20s, and so it was just devastating because I felt like when they would say, we're done, we're walking away from God, and you're just like, I'm a failure at this. In those moments, it was crazy. It would be like the very next day, somebody would send a letter, or back in the days, because we got letters and not
text messages,
emails. But I would get a letter from a kid that said, thank you so much for always being there, and showing what Christ was. And you're like, okay, all right, I can do this for another 6 months, and it would just kind of re-energize you to keep doing what you felt like God called you to do. And so those were those moments early on in ministry that when I felt like quitting, would keep me going, whether it was through a letter or through a phone call or a student just saying thank you for everything that you do. That was the motivation to keep going early on in ministry, and really even now it's that motivation. Whenever you get the phone call from someone or the text message from someone that says thank you so much for praying for me or encouraging me, and you see that person growing in their walk with the Lord, you're like, okay, all right, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
So whenever you get those kind of those small reaffirmations, do they always feel timely?
They do. It really is God just working things out when we need it. Because those people don't know what you're going through. At that time, they don't know that you're to the point of I'm gonna walk away. I'm a failure at ministry. They don't grasp any of that. They're just hopefully being led by God in that moment to send that encouraging text that you need to hear it. So yeah, it is timely. A timely divine email or text message from God that just encourages you in that moment.
So do you think you'd still be in ministry without people stepping out? And because for me it's uncomfortable to in some situations, and it sounds weird to say, but sometimes it's uncomfortable to show gratitude. I just kind of want to. Sure.
I think I would like to say that I would still be in ministry, whether I got any of those encouraging things or not, because I'd like to say that, without a shadow of a doubt that I know that God has called me, and you just trudge through it. I think I would probably question myself a lot more and allow the enemy to succeed in questioning that calling, if it wasn't for those divine moments of encouragement. So sometimes you don't think that, that person, whether it's a pastor or in any type of way, would, they always seem like they've got it all together, that they're, they always encourage me. They always, and so sometimes it is hard for people to go, you know what, I'm going to encourage my pastor today, or I've got something that maybe would encourage him. And so, I think it's vital that in ministry we get those moments.
So in your early years in ministry, what kind of mistakes do you feel like you made as a youth pastor or a young pastor? Kind of like the ones that stand out and you're like, man, if I had only changed this, then I might be on a different trajectory. Maybe more advanced than where I'm at.
Well, for me, one of the biggest mistakes early on is not putting myself in a position to be challenged more. And I don't know if that was because of insecurity. I wouldn't surround myself with people that would challenge me early on, because I think, my thought was maybe I was still trying to figure it out, or I didn't want to, in comparison to other ministries, to think, well, I don't preach like those guys do, or, I'm not as creative as those guys are. And so I didn't surround myself with guys that would challenge me and push me, not only spiritually in my own life, but in ministry, to kind of take those challenges.
Is that something that you've corrected in yourself, or is that something that you still try to correct?
I would say that I'm correcting it. I really feel like over the last 3 to 4 years, in my own walk with the Lord, I've said, okay, God, I don't have all the answers. I don't, I'm more up to, hey, critique how I preach, critique how I lead, critique all those things so that I can learn. I'll put myself in the room with guys that obviously pastor much larger churches, but also are far greater leaders in different areas, and to say, okay, I want to learn. I want to observe. I want to say, yeah, I'm not doing that right, and we've got to figure out how to change it. And obviously it's going to look different than how they lead or how they pastor, but put myself in those positions so that I can grow. I feel like I've changed that and changing that as I move forward. So.
How have you learned to manage criticisms from your younger, or from your earlier days in ministry? And then, because it's funny, because whenever you're first starting out in something, it does seem that you're a lot more sensitive to criticisms, just because you're trying so hard. And then whenever you do start getting comfortable in those roles, it seems like you're able to handle a person is able to handle criticisms better, just because they start seeing all the stuff that they don't know. But then also because it's something that's less integrated into yourself, and because you're more confident. It's not necessarily just your identity. Of course, whenever we take on something new, it's something that we're constantly trying to get better at. It does seem to become a part of our identity. So how have you learned to filter out the meaningful criticisms, even if they're not the friendliest, but there's still value in hearing it, from the criticisms that people just like to complain?
I think a lot of it just comes obviously with growth in our own walk and our confidence and maturing in our relationship with the Lord. Because early on I did, I took it personal. And sometimes it is personal. Sometimes, the criticism is personal. And, even now, there's personal criticism that comes with it. But early on, I took it all as personal. But as I grew and I surrounded myself with those people, not those people who were criticizing, but I would surround myself with better leaders. And they would say, hey, listen, don't take it personal. Take what applies. Take the criticism that applies and say, okay, that's an honest opinion. That's an honest take, and let's fix it, or let's change that, and really work in those parameters. And as I've grown, we hear a lot of criticism, and to kind of navigate what is personal and what is beneficial.
So what are the common criticisms that you hear about most pastors that are generally unfair, and it's just because someone doesn't have the broadest perspective on the life of a pastor?
Probably, man, there's so many. There's some truth to, I think there's truth to a lot of the criticism because of how pastors handle things. One of the things is that people look at pastors and say, well, they're concerned about the numbers of people. And yeah, there's some truth to that, because if numbers are important, because that's people coming to Jesus. That's people growing in their relationship with the Lord. But it's also, not fair that pastors are just consumed with numbers because, they want larger churches, they want, better finances. But for some guys to say, listen, when numbers go up, hopefully that means that we're doing something right. That means that we're effectively reaching people. And so I think a lot of it is there's criticism that sometimes pastors just care about numbers, or, it's about programs, or it's about people, they're concerned with the people who, the only people that matter are the people who write the tithe checks. Like I said, I think there's some truth to that, but I also know that, as a pastor, I have to take into consideration the direction and how we function and flow as a church. I have to consider from the nursery to the seniors ministry. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there's criticism that, you don't make decisions because pastors don't make decisions because they don't want to offend people.
How do you try to base your decisions?
I try to base it on the best decision for the overall health of the church.
And what does a healthy church look like to you?
A church where all those different age groups are growing, are thriving, actually growing in their walk with the Lord. Not just, it's not healthy just because you have a program. It has to be healthy because individuals are growing in their walk with the Lord, and they're excited about that growth. And so I think when you can do that in every age group, then it's healthy. Yeah.
And what are some of the mistakes that you made early on that you're glad you made? Things that really taught you something that you are able to use later?
I think I wouldn't say that it was a mistake. Early on, it was probably a mistake in just being open and transparent. Because a lot of times in ministry, what you learn is you should probably guard yourself. You probably shouldn't be too open. Why? Because there is that criticism. There is that.
Whenever you say open and transparent, what do you mean specifically? Like with your struggles, or with
with struggles? Just being, sharing in the fact that, one of the reasons why I got into ministry is because I always felt like that there was a disconnect. I didn't feel like my pastor was real early on in life. It always came across that, here's a guy who, all he does is pray. He knows the Bible. He doesn't struggle with anything. It was like he's there and I'm here, and in order to be a good Christian, I'm never going to get there. So when the Lord kind of called me into ministry, he just said, be real. And being real is that we do struggle. Leadership does struggle. Leadership, sometimes we put them up on the platform and they fall off the platform. Well, they fall off the platform because, they still live in a world where they struggle. So I just felt like if I could share my struggles, not just past struggles, but daily struggles, and that overcoming those struggles only happens through a relationship with the Lord.
Do you see a benefit of sharing your struggles and also having that be a kind of a pressure for you to overcome those struggles, so that other people don't just see your struggles, but they also see your growth?
Sure, absolutely. Because the struggle is I think part of the problem with sharing those is that you open yourself up to the criticism of people, because we live in this world where we think that Christianity is, it's this way. And I remember one of the first times early on in ministry, I was preaching. And it was on a Sunday night. I was just sharing a story and growing up on a farm, my parents went to church, my grandparents went to church, and they had in my opinion, they had an amazing relationship with the Lord. But I would hear the word crap, and I didn't think anything about it, and I was preaching.
Oh, a dirty word.
I know. I know.
Such a dirty word.
And so I was just sharing, and I was just like, I think it was something like, along the lines of, that's crap. And I said that in my message. I didn't think anything about it. And I went on, I got called into the senior pastor's office. It bothered so many people that I used the word crap from the pulpit, God's holy podium, that I used the word crap. And I sat back and I thought, okay, yeah, I probably should have used a different, word, because in that moment, that word for so many people immediately just shut off. They didn't hear anything else I said. They didn't, it bothered them so much. Things like that I just sat back and
so in the Bible it says that God judges our heart, and not necessarily our actions, which it makes it a lot harder on us with God judging our heart, because that thing does what it wants sometimes.
Right.
So where do we draw the line between us having a good heart about something and also upholding a standard?
I think that's where obviously that's where the struggle is because, one of the things early on is I would share, even now, I share movie references. I share all these things. For me what I've learned is to be cautious. I shared a movie reference once, and
Was it Die Hard?
People flipped out.
It was Pulp Fiction, wasn't it?
No.
Brought out a samurai sword on the stage.
But I can't even. I can't even remember the movie.
Kill Bill.
But it had Richard Gere in it, and I used it in reference into how we're called to dance in this walk with the Lord. And sometimes we fall. If you're not a dancer, you're learning how to dance, you trip over your feet, you do that. Well, I used a clip from that, and people were like, I didn't say the name of the movie. The only movie that I've ever actually mentioned was like Rudy, and people were like highly offended because you saw Rudy, and I'm like,
it would have been a better movie if he never made the team. It would have been a much better movie. Would have been shorter, but it would have been much better.
But I'm sitting here going, wait a minute. Mm-hmm. What we think is a standard. See, and that's the thing, is that for the most part, we don't live our life according to God's standard. We live it to our standard. And we think, or we set the standard, and we try to pull God up to this standard, where if we really just lived our life according to God's standard, because we'll go, oh, well, you saw these movies. Well, that's not right. Well, According to who? According to you? You're gonna look at me and you're gonna evaluate me based on a standard that you've set. And obviously, I'm not saying that you just go out and watch everything. Even for me and April, we have a standard. We're not just going to sit and watch something that or listen to something that tears down God or affects our spirit in a negative way. Early on, I felt like if I, because of those early mistakes, I felt like if I was too open, that people would judge me and would say, oh, he's less of a pastor, he's less of a minister because maybe he struggles with these things, or oh, he saw a movie, which obviously it's not like it was back when my parents were growing up and you just didn't go to movies or things like that. But what I've learned from is to be cautious in how much I share, but share enough to know that there's a relatable thing there, but I can't live based on man's standards, because because one man's standard is going to be completely different than another man's standard. Mm-hmm. And so to say, God, listen, you're going to judge my heart, but you're going to judge my standard of living and how I treat people and how I live. And
so one thing that I found interesting that Jesus did is that he and I heard somebody break it down into he treated the multitude one way, he treated the 12 one way, and then he treated the 3 one way, and then he treated the one way. So do you find yourself doing that? Like, and obviously everybody does it to a certain extent, but from a pastoral role, do you also find yourself doing that? Is the way how transparent you are to different people, depending on who it is, and I guess it's based on that trust relationship.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because we can't, I had a conversation not too long ago with someone because they were really upset. They wanted people to go deeper in their walk. And they felt like people need to go deeper and they ought to be challenged more. Well, the problem with that is, people need to go deeper and people need to be challenged more. But that comes back to a personal thing. That comes back to you wanting that walk. And so when on a Sunday morning, if I throw out something to the people in the congregation, there are going to be people who grab hold of it and say, you know what, I want more. I'm gonna take it a little bit deeper. And that's kind of how I view like with the, when Jesus spoke to the multitudes. But then there was a smaller group that said, okay, we want to follow you. We want to spend more time with you. And then, he would share with them. And then there was that smaller group that said, okay, we want much more. We want to go deeper. And then there, obviously in the relationship between God and Jesus, that Jesus said, okay, I'm getting alone with the Father. And so, you have to take those. Everybody's not going to take it the same. Everybody's going to, live to, as they grow, they're going to live to different standards. And say, you know what, I'm going to, a great example with our staff. I feel like those guys have said, you know what, I'm going to live a little bit different, not condemning any other way that anybody else is living, but I'm going to devote myself more to the things of the Lord. I'm gonna devote myself. I'm gonna step up and have that higher standard. That comes through and having that relationship with people. Obviously, is different than just say somebody that just comes on a Sunday morning. Because the person who just comes on a Sunday morning, they hear my transparency. They go, man, that guy, he shared something that was a little odd, or man, he's extremely open. But the people who say, hey, I want to go a little bit deeper. Yeah. They begin to know your heart and understand some of those things a little bit better.
Over the years, from whenever you first started, since that was kind of transparency and honesty has seemed like to be the foundation of your ministry, Have you found, is that like finding an audience, like a comedian finds an audience, or is it, have you noticed people are more open to that kind of style nowadays as opposed to before, or has it kind of stayed the same?
I think so. I think people are more open to it nowadays. There's obviously there's a balance that I feel like that I have to find. On a Sunday morning, you are ministering to so many different people. We've got people in our congregation that are very, very educated, very, and I say educated in the word, but they're not story people. They give me the facts, give me this, give me the information, and let me run with that. And then there are people, and this is really kind of where I feel like my ministry goes, is the example in the relationship. If you can take a story in the Bible and bring a very practical, personal, that they go, I can relate to that. All right. And so then for them, it helps them grow in their walk with the Lord. And so it is finding and knowing, in that moment, okay, is this a moment, Lord, in ministry, you learn kind of to read the audience, to kind of, okay, are they a story people, or is this So does that happen live during a service where you kind of throw something out there and then you get that weird feedback and then you kind of adjust? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And those are the things that you learn through that. And it's just, I like to call it, just in that moment, because people go, hey, was that in your notes? That wasn't in my notes. That was just, okay, watching people's reaction, but then saying, Lord, is this something that you want me to share, something that you feel like I need to share? And if it's not, then, kind of let me know and I'll move on.
Does gauging that ever get distracting whenever you're trying to deliver a message that you feel like you're meant to deliver?
It is. It was funny because we were actually talking about this a couple of weeks ago in our staff meeting, is just kind of learning how to navigate those moments and not being driven by emotion or driven by, how people respond. Because I think a lot of times if we see somebody responding and they're kind of like, I've tuned this out. Then we tend to go, okay, I've got to create something to engage them. When a lot of times the Lord is just saying, keep it simple, keep it to the word, and don't feel like, because I think we take that personal. We think, oh, I've bored these people, or oh, I've not done a good job here, and so then we're like, okay, well, I've got to create something and God just says, hey, listen. Don't let that change the direction. Stick to what it is that originally I stirred in your heart. Stick to that and navigate that, because sometimes we tend to want to go, oh, they're not responding, so let me
readjust and try to make this a little bit more interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
So
kind of going back to kind of the transparency aspect. Well, why do you think we as Christians in the congregation, we walk into a church building and then all of a sudden we try to pretend that things that we've done throughout the week or seen throughout the week don't exist anymore, and they shouldn't exist in here, whenever it's not the pulpit or the pieces of wood at the altars, technically are supposed to be holy, but it's us that are supposed to actually be holy. And then we take it to the point of offense whenever something happens in the four walls of the church that we don't think should happen.
I think, we struggle with transparency just in general. And so when we come into church and sometimes we don't even have to be confronted by a minister in a message with it. It's just the fact that we're back in church, that we're confronted with all of this stuff, maybe that we feel like we're struggling with, or we feel like we haven't measured up. We know the issues that we're dealing with. And so, we're already kind of building up those walls. And when we come into the church, we're confronted with that. We struggle all the way back to Adam and Eve. They struggled with the issue of intimacy and transparency when sin entered in, because we don't like to hear, what we're doing wrong. We don't like to hear, that we're not living up to a standard. And so we struggle with that. So we'll focus in on the issues, the offenses inside the church, because we don't want to deal with those things. We'll begin to find the things that begin to offend us, so that we don't have to deal with the issues of transparency.
But I mean, like in your case of people taking offense over sharing a video clip that you didn't name the movie, you didn't say who or anything about it except showing a clip and probably relating it back to your message. And then people who would get offended by that, they would have to know and have seen the movie probably to understand, to be offended by that, if at all.
Well, I think yes. I think that is absolutely true, that on some level they've probably seen it, and so they probably struggled with whether or not they should have saw it or. But I think a lot of that is just probably how they were brought up, because really a younger generation today doesn't have an issue with it. It's kind of an older generational thing. Why? Because it was so instilled in them, of movies and not going to the movies. And now we're bringing an aspect of that into a service which they think is holy, which I'm not saying that this place isn't holy. I'm not saying that an altar isn't a holy place, but we've relegated the holiness to the walls and in this building. And you said that it's in us. It's living that. Years ago, I as a youth pastor, I dealt with an issue. I had a kid come in and he had his hat on backwards, and he came into the sanctuary, and that really offended some people, and they felt like he was being disrespectful to the house of God. But they were of a generation and of a mindset, well, first of all, if you enter in a house, you take off your hat, because that was disrespectful. Well, okay, but whether you wear a hat or you don't wear a hat in the house of the Lord, God is not offended by that. God is not offended by whether you're wearing a hat or you're not wearing a hat. God is saying, listen, there's much greater issues than whether or not this person's wearing a hat. You're offended because he's wearing a hat. Well, I'm offended because you have hate in your heart. And so we've struggled with these things that we've made as, value or holy. And God is saying, listen, that's not the issue.
So do you think we've interjected too much of our own cultural differences into how we worship?
Absolutely. I really do. There are those that struggle with, all the theatrics of even just a regular worship service. They'll go, well, I have issue with this. We don't need all that. Well, no, you don't need all that. But just because you have that doesn't mean that you're less spiritual. Years ago, I heard somebody say, one of the older guys in the church said, we don't need any of this stuff. We don't need the coffee shops. We don't need the fellowship. He was like, I got saved. I came to church. I went to an altar. I repented of my sins, and I got up and I've lived my life that way. And I go, well, in essence, yeah, that's the truest form. And I said, but you have to understand that we live in a culture today that is very relational. And so through relationships, people come to know Jesus. Through whether it's having coffee, that people come to know Jesus. Whether it's through a connect group and playing kickball, people come to know Jesus. It's not the same as it used to be. People didn't think about it. People didn't hang out at Well, I think they probably did. They hung out at coffee shops. But growing up, I would tell my parents, hey, just drop me off at the mall. I'm going to hang out at the mall. We did this thing. Restaurants became a place where you fellowshipped, you hung out in. Starbucks has made millions of dollars because why? People just hang out. And they do that. And so we would get into these routines where we would go to church and we go home.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I remember a long time ago, I was in a youth service, and I had to leave with one of my friends that night because my parents were doing something. It was on a Wednesday night, and I liked hanging out after church and hanging out with my friends that I had made there. And my friend always had to leave like early. I think his dad had to be up at like 5 a.m. or something, so he was ready to get home. And I was like, dang it, I really wanted to hang out. And I remember him telling me, I think, now that I look back at it, I think he was more just trying to justify him not being able to hang out. But he was like, well, church isn't a place to hang out. And I was like, I was thinking about that because no one ever told me that before. And I'd never thought about that before. And then I went home and I was like, yeah, I told my dad, I was like, yeah, Tony told me this. And my dad was like, that's not true. Where do you think you're supposed to fellowship? And that always had stuck with me. It's like, okay, the pieces of relationships and the church kind of started being put together a little bit better from that day.
Well, because I think, for the most part, we like to keep church and our life separate. Church is, okay, we go to church. We go to church whether it's on a Sunday or a Wednesday, but then we're separate the rest of the time. What over the last probably close to 20 years, what the church has shifted more to is it's not just about Sunday. It's not just about Wednesday, but it's about fellowship. It's about, and this is how our relationship with the Lord should be. It's a constant fellowship. It's a constant community. In the early church in Acts, there's this amazing example. And, we say all the time, well, we got to do things biblical. We got to do things biblical. Okay, well, let's go back to the early church. Let's use that as an example. And people are like, well, okay, hold on now. That's too much, Why? Because I think that in and of itself, we don't like to be that transparent. We can come to church and we can put on some things and get through that service, but people really don't know us. But when we begin to fellowship, when we begin to really live life with people, they see us, and to know that, hey, you're struggling today. No, I'm not struggling today. It's one thing to, pray for me on Sunday, because I've got some issues. But when you start living life with people, you know what those issues are. And we struggle with that because we think, oh, they'll think less of us. I used to think, what would happen, honestly, if our congregations knew what really our elders, our pastors, our leaders, what their life looked like outside of a Sunday service? Because we get into this, it's a Sunday mentality, But what does that look like beyond that? Yeah, they still have the same issues. They still struggle with things. I share all the time. April and I, we have disagreements. We disagree on sometimes how to discipline the boys because of the way that I grew up and the way that she grew up. And growing up, I never knew that I saw my pastor on Sunday morning. I saw him on Sunday night. I saw him and his wife in those moments. And you would never know that. He honestly, he wasn't going to share it. He wasn't going to talk about.
You never know what.
You wouldn't know that they struggled. You wouldn't know any of those things. And so for me, when we say we're going to create this environment, and I guess people, I think that, Andy, really that's what people struggle with is when you try to create a fellowship atmosphere, that it begins to push those boundaries of what I want people to know about my life. And some people are just good with coming on Sunday morning, going through the routine and getting up and then living their life the way they want to live it. And when you create that fellowship atmosphere, you're saying, hey, listen, This isn't just about Sunday. This is about every day. And I want to walk with you. I want to talk with you. I really do want to fellowship with you and go through those things. That's where people kind of tend to push back, I think. And so
whenever, so going back kind of to the example of treating people differently based on your relationship with them and also where they're at. Obviously, you would, in a staff, you would want people that you can be more honest with and have that closer relationship with. So what kind of qualities and traits do you find whenever trying to figure out who's going to be on your staff? What's most important to you?
I think what's most important is that people can be honest. Honesty in hey, listen. Because I've told people all the it's easy to say, well, you don't have to agree with me. But if you don't agree with me, then I'm not going to involve you in decisions or things like that. For me, and I think I've learned this going back to early mistakes, is you put the people in the room that you value their opinion, and their opinion may not always agree with you, but you value their opinion, and that's based on relationships. But to be honest, if you can be honest and say, hey, listen, I understand the whole dynamic, but I disagree with you, then I can sit back and I can go, okay, now I've got a fair, honest assessment of maybe where we're at and maybe what needs to take place. And so honesty is key, but also relationships, people wanting to spend time and develop those relationships. Because when you spend time with people, they hear your heart. They know, even whenever you would throw something out there that is just completely off the wall, they can sit back and they can go, but I know his heart. I know the true intent of that. And so I want to be a part of that. I want to help in accomplishing those things. Early on in ministry, I watched a pastor that struggled with that. He struggled with trusting people. You would think that, if you spend time with people, that even if they disagreed with you because of the relationship that you had with them, that you could say, okay, it'd be like us and our relationship, and you go and, I make a decision and you go, Pastor, I understand your heart, but I disagree with you. Then because of our relationship, that I may not like that you disagree with me, but I can sit back and go, you know what? Because of the relationship that Andy and I have, because of the trust that we have and the honesty that we have, I've got to sit back and reevaluate this. I'm not taking it personal. I've got to honestly reevaluate it, because he wouldn't just come at me and say, I disagree with you. I don't think this is a good idea because of the relationship. That there's got to be some merit there. And so I would have to sit back and go, okay, let me rethink this, and not take it personal. Not just go, Andy doesn't agree with me, so I'm not going to involve Andy in any more decisions or conversations about that.
So how do you navigate the waters between people who might, whenever they share a disagreement, whenever they might just not in general share in or buy into the general vision that you might have for the church, as opposed to, hey, I feel strongly that this might not be a good idea?
I think it comes back to relationship. I think it comes back to, because honestly, you can, people can say, well, I don't think that this is a good idea. Okay, well, let's talk about it. Let's honestly look at it. And sometimes we think that as, they're going to try to convince me why this is a good idea. But if we don't honestly know the person, if we don't honestly know their heart and their direction, we're just automatically closing that off. And, because listen, there are a lot of people that disagree with me. I don't mind people disagreeing with me. You're entitled to your opinion. You're entitled to all those things. But I think that when we sit down and we hear everything out, that we can go, there's some truth to that. Because people who honestly, they'll sit down, you'll sit down with me and you'll give me your opinion. The opinion could be off of what you've heard or something like that. And we can sit down and we can talk about it. And hopefully because of the relationship, you can go, well, there's some merit and I understand there. I don't agree with it, but I get what he's saying. I understand that. And so that comes through talking it out. I think one of the biggest frustrations in ministry is that a lot of times people don't. And I don't know if it's because of the title of pastor or the position we hold in ministry that people don't feel comfortable in coming to leadership sometimes and saying, hey, you know what? I don't agree with this, but I'd like to hear your reason why. They just are really emphatic about, I don't like it. But yet they'll never talk to us about a decision that we made or anything like that. They'll just say, I don't like it. And sometimes they get offended and they move on, or sometimes they just don't say anything.
Like, what am I supposed to do with that?
And to be able to sit down, and like I said, I think that comes back to the relationship aspect of it, is that you can go, you know what? I don't like the decision, but I've got a relationship with him that I can sit down with him and we can talk about this. Because maybe the decision was made or something was done that I didn't have all the facts. And I like even before I make a decision, I like to just sit down and test the waters, talk to people about, hey, if we made this decision, how would you feel like? Or if the church went in this direction, how do you feel like, it would be received? I base that on relationships, not just deep relationships, but shallow relationships, because the people who sometimes you don't have the deep relationship with, they're going to give you an honest kind of feel, where the people you have a deep relationship with, sometimes maybe you have that deep relationship because you're of like minds, you've spent a lot of time together. And so they'll go, oh yeah, I agree. But if we're all looking at it from the same perspective, then sometimes we alienate the people who don't have that same perspective as us, and their perspective isn't wrong. I think it really is. It's relationships, to navigate those things.
So what are your roles in ministry right now?
Lead pastor, and district men's director.
So as far as your district men's director role, how did that come about?
About 4 years ago, the guy who was doing it had done it for 17 years. Was retiring. Our district superintendent reached out to me and said, hey, would you consider stepping into men's ministry? And my first response was no, because that position had always been a full-time gig, and I didn't want to. I didn't feel like God is moving me out of pastoring, and so I said no. And he said, well, you wouldn't have to, stop pastoring. We're looking at changing those things up. And I told him that I'd pray about it. And it was kind of crazy, because about 2 years before that, at a men's retreat, I was talking to one of our guys and saying, man, there's got to be a change in how we do district ministry and men's ministry, but not just in the district men's ministry. There needs to be a change in how we do men's ministry in general. And so my heart just really
What do you mean in general? Like the church as a whole, like every denomination?
The church as a whole, yeah. If we step back and we look, the men's role in the church has greatly diminished, the activity, the involvement. And so, when you, and I get, obviously men and women are completely different and geared in the way that they think and process things. You could throw a women's event in a church and everybody shows up. All the ladies show up and they're going to talk for hours, and they're going to, you throw a men's event and, it's like cricket. But then also, if you step back and you look at a typical worship service, men, they enter into a worship service more reserved. Women, they throw everything off. They're abandoned to whatever it is that's going to take place in that worship service. And men are more like, controlled type of response. And so I just really felt like, even for our church and the church as a whole, men's ministry just, something needed to take place in our men. And so my heart just really began to change, and we began to grow as a church in our men's ministry when we put that focus on men's ministry and targeting in different areas. And something that I was just really praying about. Well, when I got home that evening and told April that the offer had been made, she goes, well, I think that goes in line with what your heart's been saying. You know, we kind of stepped into that role, and because the heart for men and for healthy men, because when we have healthy, strong Christian men, we have much better families, we have much better churches. Was excited that I got to kind of move into that area of ministry and really focus on that. So,
what do you think the issue is? So, I've been in a lot, and even whenever I was working in youth ministry, the girls would be talking a lot. But the guys, it was pulling teeth to get them to talk.
Sure.
And then, you know, even at first, whenever I started doing coming in on the Wednesday men's group sessions, it was getting like pulling teeth, getting them to talk, or whoever was leading it. And it all seems, as far as I can tell, to stem from a place of finding it really hard to be vulnerable. Because
sure.
whenever you talk and you put yourself out there, I know I hate looking dumb, and I hate I don't like putting myself out there and leaving myself open to a place of
sure.
personal attack or anything like that. Whereas I'm very much, we're in the Bible where it says the silence of a fool looks like wisdom. So most times it just seems it would behoove me to just keep my mouth shut. But anyways, I know a lot of people who know me might find that really hard to believe. But anyways, so how do we stop being so, how do we be a little bit stronger to be vulnerable?
That's a really good question. I think where we've gotten as men is, I think there's a lot that goes into it, because men are, we don't want to be that exposed. I think it is a legitimate concern of every man, whether we feel like it's an attack on our masculinity. If we don't know something, or if we don't, I think we struggle with that. I think we struggle with being that open to say, hey, listen, I've got weaknesses. And I think a lot of that comes from culture. I think a lot of it comes from how we've grown up. And we were talking about it the other day. You take men in an environment, and we're not going to admit, men aren't going to sit for the most part and admit, oh, maybe I don't know how to tie a fishing knot. Oh, yeah, I know how to do it. Even when we probably really don't know how to do it.
And things like that, I haven't actually been, like, I haven't hit 30 yet, and I've actually been more comfortable nowadays being like, no, I don't know how to do that.
Sure.
Should I?
No,
but whereas whenever I was in my early 20s and my late teens, I would hate to admit that I didn't know how to do something,
right,
or didn't know what something was.
But I think that again goes to culture. We're living in a day where it is a lot more acceptable to admit some of those things. I have a friend that a couple of years ago, he came to the realization, he goes, I've never grilled anything. And, as a man, I'm sitting here going, I can't tell another man I don't know how to grill. He was like, because that's the manly thing to do. He goes, I learned how to grill a steak by asking the guy at H-E-B. And he goes, but I didn't. And he goes, but my dad wasn't around in my life to kind of teach me those things. We live in a culture now that it is much more acceptable to ask the questions, to do those things, than it was for a generation to admit some of those things. And because we felt like it was less manly if we didn't know how to work on a car, if we didn't know how to fix certain things, if we didn't know how to do certain things. Why? Because that's what culture said men do. Early on in my life, I was telling a group of guys that, you would see on TV the Marlboro Man, the Coors guy,
Right.
those guys, those are manly men. That's the way it was. You don't, the hungry man, all those different things. That's what culture said a man was. So we felt less than if we didn't know. I think all these things shape us, whether it's culture, how we were brought up. My dad was the youngest of 10 kids, a German family. And he knew that his parents loved him, but they never said, "I love you." And so my dad growing up, there was just things that men do, and if you don't know, you figure it out. And my dad early on made the decision that, hey, I'm going to use the word love. I'm going to tell my kids I'm going to hug them. I'm going to kiss them. I'm not going to be afraid to admit that I don't know how to do certain things. For me growing up, it was easy to go, "Oh, I don't know how to do that." "Oh, my dad used to make me change the oil. One, because it was cheaper than to go pay somebody to do it. But as a man, you need to learn how to change your oil. My boys don't know how to change the oil. I don't expect them to know how to change the oil. Why? Let's pay somebody to change the oil." It's culture. It's the world that shapes us. And I think that, we don't like to walk into the room and think that we're not the alpha dog. I think we struggle with that as men.
How do we get the confidence to not need to be, though? Because for me, it was finding the things that understanding what my strengths are and playing to that and being comfortable in those, and then things that aren't my strengths, being comfortable and understanding that they're not.
Sure.
And it's fine. And I can surround myself with people who got those covered. One of the reasons why I love my wife is that she has strengths that I don't, and I have strengths that she doesn't. And so how, and part of it, so I see this from two different ways. Some ways of where the church has failed, and some ways that society in general has failed with culture. And first of all, with society, there's a lot of TV shows and movies that and even commercials that play the man or the dad as just kind of an idiot, and then the mom as smart but cruel and kind of cold. Or the dad would be an idiot but lovable, and then the mom would be smart but kind of cruel.
Right.
And so it just seems like that's kind of the role that society has started because of the counterculture to the Marlboro manly man.
Sure.
And it kind of swung way too far
Absolutely.
the other way. So where do you see that playing a major role in the church? Because as far as I can tell in the church, and not just here, because I've seen it at a bunch of different churches, where the Mother's Day message will be nothing but adoration, and then the Father's Day message will be a little bit more kind of pounding the gavel. And
right.
We need to get this under control, guys, kind of a thing. And I see that as somewhat of a failure in the church, because I know that as someone who's about to be a father, and being comfortable with what I do bring to the table, I also don't want to go somewhere and being told that I'm still not enough as a man.
Sure.
And I especially don't want to hear that from the church.
Sure.
So where do you kind of see those two roles?
I think that we have, I think in the church, we've let culture dictate what a man should be. And so we'll say you need to be a man's man and a godly man. Well, the godly man isn't going to match up to what the man's man look like. It doesn't, because we think the man's man is you take the authority, you're man, but God says that man comes in line with me. He doesn't come in line with the world. And so, and you're absolutely right. Even me growing up, I always heard, Father's Day messages, it wasn't, guys didn't want to come to church on Father's Day. You don't want to hear everything you're doing wrong. You don't want to hear that your family or your children are off the reservation because you're not a man of God, or because you're not living, you're not instilling those things or all those things. And the man is sitting there saying, you know what, I work hard. I'm working to do these things. Or we go, well, you're not a man because you're not the breadwinner. And so we've brought all this into the church, and we said, this is what a godly man is. When what a godly man is you finding who you are in Christ. And that may not look like anybody else. And it's being confident in that. So I really do. I feel like that what we've done is that we've allowed the culture to affect the church in what the man is supposed to look like. I think this is how we kind of navigate it. The church, the man says, I'm the head of my household, and that, I'm over my wife. All those things are, yes, that's what the Bible says, but it's in a spiritual understanding. And to say, hey, you're not less than just because you don't change your oil, or you're not any of those things that what we say the man should be. Culture today, like you're saying, the man is kind of that role is shifting. So if the role is shifting in culture, then we're gonna have a complete swing the opposite direction from the Marlboro man, from the Coors man, from what we said early on was a man's man. But then you have this struggle with men in the church going, well, he's not a man. I like to shop. A lot of men don't like to shop. I like to clothes shop,
Amazon.
I like to do it. So does that make me less of a man? I don't care. That may make me less of a man in your eyes.
So what are the standard biblically? What are the standards of a man? What do we as Christian men actually need to strive for?
I think we need to strive for honoring God in the way that we live our life, in the way that we talk, the way that we react, the way that we deal with people. I think we honor God and living up to godly standards in how we function through life. In our marriage, you've heard it's been said in the church, when God took the rib from Adam, he didn't take it, he took it from his side, and he didn't place it behind man or in front of man, but he placed it beside man. And yes, as a spiritual man, I am to lead spiritually my family, to encourage them to grow in their walk with the Lord, to pray spiritually, covering over them, and to set the example of godly standards in how we deal with things in life, and to walk in that relationship with the Lord that glorifies Him, and so that my wife sees that, so that my kids see that, to let them see love, forgiveness, grace, and value. That's, in my opinion, that's what a godly man should be. That's what the standard should be in our home. How are my kids supposed to, if we're to walk in this relationship with the Lord, how are my boys supposed to see how to treat a woman? They need to see it from their father. They need to see, and not treat a woman in man, hear me roar, and I'm the authoritative, but in a loving manner. Why? Because I'm supposed to reflect that Christ-like in my life. And so that their mom has value. And so that women in their life have value, that they have input, that they are there to encourage and help, and to walk through life together, to set that example for them. To, if I don't display to them love and forgiveness, how are they supposed to experience what that really is? For me growing up, my dad let me know that more than anything else, God loved me. And that if I if I tried to live to the world standard, I'd never meet that standard, because that standard is constantly changing. But if I lived to God's standard, of love and grace and forgiveness and set those values in that, I'll find who I am. And I think that's the most important thing. You said, as you've grown, now that you with your relationship with your wife, she has strengths that, areas that you're weak in. Early on, we struggled with that. Early on, we struggled with putting ourselves in that situation and admitting those things. But as we grow, that we can say, okay, these people are valuable to me. This relationship, I see her strengths and I love her strengths. Why? Because her strengths make me stronger. Those are, you get to the point where you're not threatened by that. I'm not threatened by the fact that early on I was threatened with the fact that maybe it was because of my learning disabilities and things like that. I was always intimidated by people who were smarter than me and had a better education than me. But what I've learned growing up, as I've learned in my relationship with the Lord and who I am, I love the fact that my wife is a genius. She's highly educated. That doesn't threaten me. I love to be around people who are highly educated. It doesn't threaten me anymore. But it's because of I've grown in my relationship with the Lord.
How did both of y'all get that self-awareness to finally understand, like, okay, I'm not the best at this. She's much better. Or even your wife saying, okay, I'm not the best at this. He's much better at it. Because I mean, in early on, that was kind of an issue for my wife and I also, because when you're young,
sure,
you finally move out of your parents' house, and then you're like, fine, I finally get to do things my way. I get to be me, my own person.
Right.
And then you get married, and then you're half of a person, essentially. Which is there's a lot of benefits to that.
Sure.
And so how do you go about getting the self-awareness of what you're good at and what you're not good at?
I think, one, you get there through that process and walking through that relationship together and being open and honest and transparent with each other, and not being afraid to ask those questions. But also, I think a lot of it is shaped in us early on in how we saw our parents handle things, and those things shaped us and molded us. Early on in our marriage, coming from a divorced family, I saw a lot of bad things. I saw a lot of negative things. And so I would question my wife's intent when the way that she was brought up, that's what she saw. And it wasn't a questioning, are you questioning me? Are you questioning the decisions, that I'm making? That's how it came to me. But she was just saying, hey, is this the right decision? I'm not questioning it. Are we making the best decision? And I took it very offensive. I took it very, personal. And so we walked through those things and just saying to each other, hey, I had to tell her, I find that very, you're questioning me. You're questioning me. She goes, no, I'm not questioning you. She would be like, honey, I just want what's best for us. And it's not that you were wrong. And I guess I took it as I was always wrong, because of the way that I grew up. And she wasn't saying, hey, you're wrong.
So if you had brought in those kind of concerns maybe earlier, because I know sometimes we have a tendency to want to let stuff go whenever,
sure.
And it seems like that's not maybe the best idea. Because then whenever you try to you think you can let something go, but
right.
then it just kind of sits there and festers. And so do you think that you would have had a lot easier of a time early on in marriage up front if you had just kind of like, hey, we need to talk about this, in a positive way?
I think so. But I think, sometimes I think we tell ourselves, hey, let's talk about it. But are we really, I think through some of those things I learned that now whenever I say, hey, let's talk about it, I'm open to what it is that she has to say. Early on, I don't know if I would have said, hey, let's talk about this. I'm still going to do it my way. I'm still going to take the offense. I'm still going to do whatever. But I think through time, because of those early struggles, is that now when we sit down, let's talk about it and let's be honest, because through that relationship now, I know that she just has the best.
How long did that take you guys?
We've been married 20 years. I don't know if we've gotten there yet. We're still learning. I think really it was about year 5 that we really began to understand each other in marriage and understand that, this is a partnership, because, in ministry, sometimes, especially when, she's in ministry, but yet she's got a full-time job. And what I've learned is, especially as pastor, we have conversations now where I go, okay, I'm not having this conversation as your pastor, I'm having it as your husband. But also because she's the worship pastor, I go, I'm not having this conversation because you're a staff member. I'm having this conversation because you're a husband. And so it's knowing that, because sometimes I'll go, you don't understand, I have to make a decision that's best for the church. And she goes, I'm right there with you. I'm not attacking you. I want what's best for whatever decision. I want the best for it. And so I say that because we still have those moments. Mm-hmm. I think that somewhere around the 5-year mark, we realized that we were in this thing together.
A real popular phrase is all you need is love. And the more I've gone through marriage, and I haven't been married that long, since 2015, but it seems like that's just utterly not true.
It's not.
Because love can be a really sweet thing, and it can also put you through some major frustrations. And it seems like the most kind of obvious base thing that you need to strive for with your partner is respect, as far as I can tell. I mean, what do you think that the most kind of base thing that you need that makes the relationship work?
Sure, because love. Listen, there are days that I don't love her as much as I did. Why? Because when things are said or things don't go the way that we want, then our emotions, all those change. But commitment through devotion, those, I'm committed. Whether she agrees or disagrees with me, we're committed. And the fact that we determined early on that we really do have to have an open communication with each other. And to say, hey, we're willing to talk about everything. We're willing to talk about whether we agree or disagree. We're willing to talk about our finances. We're willing to talk about our children, and to have that open communication, to have that relationship that, yeah, you're not always going to agree with me. That doesn't mean that you don't love me. That doesn't mean that this is over. This is the end.
So what do you think the church's function is as a part of teaching the congregation how to be in love? Because there's also the I think ridiculous idea of finding the one, which it's frustrating because well, statistically, it's unlikely.
Sure.
That alone, but it's also frustrating to see people fall out of love and be like, "Oh, they must not have been the one because everything wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be."
Right.
And it always just seems to have come down more to no, you're making a decision whether or not you want to change to have that relationship. And I think that there's also that kind of a poisonous idea is that, oh, you shouldn't change for your partner.
Sure.
Like, no, you're both, if you actually love each other, you're both going to change.
Right.
Because because you're incompatible as you are, and you need to change a few things to be a little bit more compatible.
Sure.
And that's just seems, the onus of that seems to be on the individual person instead of relying on some kind of idea of the one. And so, what do you see the church's function as, kind of teaching people how to be in love with someone?
Well, I think, it comes down to, you have to be individually, you have to be secure and in love in your relationship with the Lord. Because if it's the other way around, then we are looking for the one. The one out there may not be the one that you're looking for, because we like to say, okay, well, the one for me is, she's 6 foot, blonde head, an athlete. Because for the majority of my life, I dated athletic, blonde people. And not that April's not athletic, she is athletic, but it wasn't in that mold. But it was all about what I wanted. It was all about what I thought that one was. And what I discovered is that when I began to grow in my relationship with the Lord and understand His love for me and who I was in Christ, that's when I could, I tell people this, if April was just looking for the one for her was probably, a tall guy on a white horse.
Yeah, you'd be tall in the Philippines.
Right. But, this guy who's got it all together, mm-hmm. well educated, he's on this white horse. But when she was secure in who she was in Christ, then what happens is that you look over one day and you go, here's a guy who's not as tall. His armor's got some dents in it. His horse is not real white. But all right, this is the person I can see myself with. Then when you understand that, that it maybe it's not how you created it or you thought that it should be, then that helps you. But then for the church to understand that love is the way that Christ's love is unconditional, is ugly sometimes, but He was still committed to us. He was committed even when they spit in His face, when they nailed Him, when they disowned Him, when Peter denied Him. He was still committed in this love. And for us, for the church to help couples understand that this commitment of love to each other is in good times and bad times, and you have to understand that you're going to walk through some things. It's not always like you think it should be. Randy Travis, that song that he would sing about, I'm going to love you forever. If we really think about it, it starts out, they're young, they're in love, they're excited, they're doing things. I'm going to love you forever, even when you're old and you're gray. And
it's a real romantic idea, but not a lot of people do that.
Well, because we change, and my love for April, my desire to be with her and to walk through life with her, that hasn't changed from day one. She's changed. I've changed, those things have changed, but the commitment and the desire through the good times, through the bad times, has always been there. And we walk through those things, and it almost, it really does. I think that it gets sweeter the longer that you walk through it. I value, when I don't see I was going to say I don't see gray hair. When she looks at me, I hope that when she sees gray hair, she can say, that I love it more now, because that gray hair symbolizes what we've been through, what we've walked through,
I hope my wife feels the same way about my hair. I'm losing it. This is ridiculous. I had a full head.
But think about it. When you guys originally, you didn't. I think as a church, if we can help people to understand,
wife, you get more and more beautiful every single friggin' day.
She didn't fall in love with you because of the way that you look. Because that's going to change.
Thank God.
Amen. Amen. She fell in love with you because, first and foremost, because of your relationship with the Lord, your love for the Lord. And when we understand that in our marriage, that, because listen, if it all started out the way that it starts out, all great, we wouldn't, pharmaceuticals wouldn't be making money, all those things fade, the looks fade, all those things fade. And when we're not secure in first our relationship with the Lord, but we're not secure in our relationship with each other, then we start going, as pretty as you used to be. Or, it's not like it used to be. But I feel like why we fell in love.
Right. So. Those are the falsehoods that we kind of attach ourselves to.
Sure.
And my wife obviously caught my eye.
Sure.
And there's something to that, but it's also not why I ended up marrying her. And I think there's those little things that we kind of lose sight of.
Sure.
And we start thinking that some things are more important than they actually should be. And I see that as kind of one of the issues with society. Surprisingly, actually, though, it seems people are getting married later in life, which I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. In a few years, we'll see whenever we look at the divorce statistics. But
or we look at the population.
I think it's a good thing because it seems like people are trying to get themselves together before jumping into such a large commitment, which I see as a good thing. I think if you don't have the wherewithal to understand who you are before you get married, then it just makes that journey much more difficult when you don't have yourself figured out, and then you're trying to figure out yourself with an entire added.
Right. If we don't know who we are, and then we get married, and then we're trying to figure out who we are, then yeah, absolutely.
Not we.
No.
Not we. So kind of the last thing I guess we can talk about is how do you go about being intentional in your marriage, especially being a pastor and having, not just being a head pastor, but the district men's leader, having kind of your attention pulled every which way. How do you be intentional in your marriage and in your family life?
You have to know when those April and I like to talk about them as seasons. We'll have seasons where we're really busy and it seems like we have no time for our relationship or we have any time for family just because of the seasons. And so we look for those seasons where there's not a lot going on, church activities or our district activities. We say, you know what, we're going to devote that time to family. We're going to devote that time to our relationship. And I think it's important that, obviously that looks different for everybody. Sometimes people go, well, y'all don't take enough time for each other. What we found out is, because sometimes, you got to have finances if you're going to go on family vacations or you're going to block certain times out or things like that. And so what we've done is that we've just been really intentional of saying, there's going to be certain times where it's just going to be me and April. It's just going to be us. If that's Walmart, if that's going grocery shopping, whatever that looks like, to spend that time. I've learned over the years that I don't jump every time my phone rings. This past couple of days was a great example. Yeah, we were at a district event, but it was a great time for her and I just to be able to kind of get alone, and we were still there. But in the moments and in the times where we weren't involved with other people, when my phone would ring, I would just let it go to voicemail. She said, "Hey, your phone's ringing," and I said, "Yeah, it'll go to voicemail." It's really important to leave a message.
Yeah. Oh, I do that all the time.
Because what I've learned is that our time is valuable. Our time that we have with each other, the time that we have with our family is important. And, early on, I would take the phone call, or I'd say, "Hey, guys, I got to go now because I got to go take care of this family." Well, my family is just as important. And not that, the people's lives of the church isn't important, but to say, "Hey, this is important. You guys are important. My marriage is important. My family time is important," and to strategically let them know that, hey, this time is dedicated to you, is key. It's hard. They understand that in the ministry. My boys understand that they're sharing me with everybody that is involved in our church. That
Have they ever asked you questions about that, in terms of your time?
No. I think that because I hope that we've done a pretty good job in letting them know that Dad is there to love and walk people through. They don't. Early on, they would ask questions like if I had to get up in the middle of the night or I wasn't there because I was with a family at the hospital or something. I think that hopefully we've done a pretty good job explaining to them that this is kind of what we were called to do, but that they're important to us, and that I'm not gonna ever miss or not be a part of what they have going on in their life. And so hopefully I've done a good job in that. I probably won't know till later on in life, and I'm sitting on Dr. Phil's studio, and
Dr. Phil's the man.
That's right, but or whoever it is at the time, but it is difficult. But you do have to be mindful of it, and really make an effort. So, but